Everybody for joining us today. I'm Alex Crowley. I'm the Director of Economic and Sustainable Development for the City of Bloomington. You'll forgive me for reading from a script. I'm under strict orders from the event organizers to stay on time. I'd like to begin by thanking you for sharing your valuable time with us today to discuss how we all, together as a three-county public-private effort, can collaborate to address the significant climate challenges upon us. This is the beginning of a discussion we hope will carry well into the future. Let me recognize the elected officials from Bartholomew, Brown, and Monroe counties and cities present today with us, including John Hamilton, Mayor of Bloomington, Jim Lienhoop, Mayor of Columbus, Matt Flaherty, Bloomington Common Council, Anna Hofstetter, Nashville Town Council, in the back, Frank Miller, City of Columbus Council Member, and Tom Dell, City of Columbus Council Member, and Scott Rudd, Brown County Council. Thank you for coming. Have I overlooked anyone? Okay. So now a little housekeeping before we get going. First, let me direct you to the QR code on your table or behind me on the screen, the next screen. By scanning that, you will open a packet that includes the full agenda and bios for speakers and panelists, and links to some additional resources referenced during the course of the afternoon. A copy is also on your table. Today's meeting will last from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. The agenda, broadly, will include opening remarks from Bloomington Mayor John Hamilton and Columbus Mayor Jim Lienhoop. Thank you, mayors, for your leadership. Following their remarks will be our keynote speaker, Tom Leinberger, Executive Chairman of Cummins. Then we'll present 3 panel discussions interspersed with small blocks of time for table discussion and breaks. Broadly, the panels will focus on the science and on-the-ground impacts of climate change, the local and regional landscape of current climate action, and finally, a review of public-private structures for consideration in tri-county collaboration. As time allows, we will circulate microphones for audience questions following the presentations, and we'll be collecting questions online at the link provided on the slides ahead. Also, please enjoy light refreshments in the back of the room. Without further ado, and to kick off today's event, allow me to introduce Mayor Hamilton and Mayor Lienhoop.
Thank you very much, Alex. And first, thank you to Alex Crowley and Lauren Clemens, who helped organize all this. We're going to enjoy the day, and we appreciate that. I thank you for being here. The first Regional Climate Convening in our history. We have an exciting afternoon ahead, excellent speakers and panelists, and your discussions, too. I want to thank directly Mayor Lienhoop for your collaboration on this, our friends from Brown County, Tom Leinberger, thank you for being here, panelists, co-sponsors, community foundations who have helped make this happen. First, an acknowledgement as we gather. We recognize that the city of Bloomington sits on native land. Our city and this area are on the traditional homelands of the Miami, Delaware, Potawatomi, and Shawnee people. And we acknowledge that they are past, present, and future caretakers of this land. We also acknowledge that much of the economic progress and development in our region and Indiana resulted from unpaid labor and forced servitude of people of color, specifically enslaved African labor. We acknowledge that this land remains home to and a site of gathering and healing for many indigenous and other people of color, and we commit to the work necessary to create and promote more equitable and just communities. We are wrestling today with one of the great questions of our time. Will we preserve and sustain our places to live and thrive on our planet, community by community, country by country, and on this whole planet? It is our great challenge to address and face this climate emergency. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres opened last month's 2022 general debate in UN, imploring all of those present to, quote, lift your climate ambition. Listen to your people's calls for change. Invest in solutions that lead to sustainable economic growth, close quote. The UN noted that climate change, the global emergency, is an issue that requires coordinated solutions at all levels. We're honing in on that coordinated solutions at all levels today. You're going to hear shortly from experts. We know that Indiana will get hotter and experience more droughts and more downpours and severe storms. We're already seeing that. We should expect climate migration too, people moving within the state and the country and across the globe due to climate change. This implicates a second great challenge for us of inclusion and equity, how we assure that our communities and planet work for everyone, have a place and living options for everyone. That's another topic. But on climate, the decade of the 2020s is pivotal. Coming out of the global pandemic and a brutal recession, how will we navigate? Will we build back better, recover forward? By 2030, will we have pivoted into a sustainable future, using what we have learned about how to change during the pandemic and recession? You guys learned how to change faster than you ever thought, didn't you, the last 3 years? And let us use that to address the emergency of climate change. I am humbled to see the great talent and wisdom and potential assembled here that knows so much about climate and adaptation and mitigation, that could do so much to deal with the profound challenges ahead of us in our corner of Indiana and the world. I do not know what we can and should do precisely and in detail. No one of us knows that. I believe our city has taken several important steps recently, adopting our first climate action plan with scores of goals and actions. We have funded that plan with $1.6 million annually. We've added $4 million annually for public transportation. We are continuing Recover Forward efforts with investments in solar and building efficiencies and affordable housing and non-vehicle paths and trails, and launching transportation demand management, Go Bloomington, and more. But all these efforts are just a beginning, and surely we will get smarter and more efficient at all of this. I believe we do know at least two things now. First, we're going to be dealing with climate change for a long, long time, effectively forever. And the sooner we grapple with it, the better. And second, we know we will be more successful if we do this work together, collaborating, learning, cooperating across institutions and sectors and geographies. Perhaps we'll note a third thing too. Practically speaking, very important federal opportunities lie ahead of us as well in the immediate future, with the bipartisan infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act steering hundreds of billions of dollars into issues related to climate change. And surely local areas like ours will be in a better place to access that leverage if we're dealing proactively and collaboratively on the underlying issues. So that's what today is about. It's hard to get mayors to talk quickly. I'm trying to get through. Jim, you're up next. It's about working together now and going forward to meet the extraordinary challenges. I really appreciate you being here. It is the right place to be on the afternoon of October 4th, 2022. You're in the right room. We have several important hours ahead of us, so let's get to work. And next, you're going to hear from my friend and collaborator and terrific leader from Columbus, Mayor Jim Lienhoop.
Before we get too far into this, I just want to put a shout out to the coconut macaroons in the back. Excellent, and I recommend them to you. You know, as John said, thank you. You know, thank you for coming together today. I don't know that there's anything more important to us than our climate, but just to give you a little bit of perspective from what we see in Columbus, we deal with a variety of challenges: homelessness, affordable housing, workforce housing, drug and alcohol abuse, diversity, equity, and inclusion. But just because we're busy, okay, with a variety of challenges doesn't mean that we can take a pass on probably the most important issue in front of us, which is, you know, the preservation of our climate. So again, glad that you're here today. Over the last nearly 7 years, Mayor Hamilton and I have had the opportunity to partner on several initiatives. I'll mention two of them in particular. We've worked together to promote economic development by bringing Elevate Ventures to Bloomington and Columbus, And by working together, our communities will soon have broad-based, truly high-speed internet. Hopefully, with today's event as a start, we can create something bigger than either of our communities could individually. Without question, climate change, as I said, is the most important challenge of our time. I'm sure we'll hear more about that as the day unfolds. Part of what I hope we achieve today includes defining the initial steps in developing a framework for how municipalities address our effect on our climate and how we might lead others in our communities to join our efforts. Thank you. Now my pleasure is to introduce our keynote speaker. Tom Leinberger is the Executive Chairman of the Board of Cummins. His career with Cummins began about 30 years ago during a summer internship. In his tenure with Cummins, he has served as Chief Executive Officer, Chief Operating Officer, Executive Vice President, Chief Financial Officer, and Vice President of Supply Chain Management. I'm sure you're happy you don't have that assignment anymore. In addition to his work at Cummins, Tom is actively involved with several global and local organizations. He is a member of the Board of Directors of Harley-Davidson. He's a member of the Business Roundtable, the Central Indiana Corporate Partnership, and is co-chair of the Global Hydrogen Council. He has also chaired the U.S.-China Business Council. Tom grew up in California, earned a degree in management engineering from Claremont McKenna College, and count them, three degrees from Stanford University. He and his wife, Michelle, have 2 daughters. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Tom Leinberger.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Mayors, thank you so much, first of all, for your partnership together. There's a lot of reasons not to form a partnership between 2 cities or different regions, especially from 2 different parties, but there's more reasons to do it, and I just give you a lot of credit for seeing the reasons to do it and not the reasons not to do it. So congratulations on that, and thank you for organizing this. And thanks to everybody for coming. The fact that you're all here means that at least you're leaning in the direction that this is a problem worth solving. In fact, I would call climate change the existential crisis of our time. It's everything to do with the survival of our species, and all I can think about is my grandkids to come. I know I don't have them yet, but I'm counting on them, and you'll see why in a minute. And I want their life to be as wonderful and the environment that they enjoy to be as lovely as mine, and I'm frankly really concerned about it. So I think we have our marching orders. So thank you for engaging. And I will say that when I think about this topic of climate change, I think about my role as a leader of a big company and my role as a father. And they're kind of playing off each other a lot. For those of you that haven't heard, I did just recently change jobs. I was the CEO until just a little bit ago. You can go back 1 slide. I skipped on my talk track there. And my colleague Jennifer Rumsey took over for me, which is opportune in more ways than one. For one thing, she's an engineer and a remarkable thinker, and I think she will lead the company to the next level of capability on climate change technologies. For 2, it meant that I didn't have to do it anymore, and you can see I've let my hair grow significantly since then, among the other things that I'm enjoying not being the CEO. But one of those things is, I think now that I'm not the CEO, this issue of what's the leadership of a company got to do and what's the father of a couple of young people got to do, and to me they come together at making sure that I'm doing what I should do in climate change. Have I done enough? When I'm bouncing the child on my knees, can I say to them, hey, I had my time and I used it the way I should? That's what keeps ringing through my head. So I'll tell you what we did, and then you can make your own judge about whether I have a good story to tell my grandkids. First of all, just to start my case, I think what bolsters a little bit my case about doing what I should do is that Cummins, as a Fortune 500 company, has been committed to climate change both from a mission statement, from a strategy, from a product development case, and frankly, a 2050 zero carbon neutrality by 2050 for the last 10 years. So every day of my 10 years as CEO, I was working to make the company's strategy more and more tuned towards the future and towards reducing our carbon emissions. And by the way, our company was set on a set of values that I didn't invent, I inherited, and led me that way from the very first minute I started the company. The company believes in strengthening our communities just as much as we believe in strengthening our balance sheet. And from that foundation is what led us to the place that set in place our 2050 goals, set in place our strategy and mission statement, which I'll talk more about. And we have a stakeholder view at Cummins. So again, long preceding me, the stakeholder view says we care about our customers and our suppliers, which is probably not surprising to you. But you'll see that care for customers means that not only do we have to have the zero carbon technologies, but we need to bring them along with us. We need to meet them where they are and bring them forward, these technologies. So I'll talk more about that. We also need to have jobs for our communities, for the people in our communities. So it's not okay to say, never mind all those diesel engine plants, we'll just close those and start making batteries in China and see how that goes. No, we have a commitment to those employees to make sure that we have work for them, we provide well-being for them, and that we train them to do new technologies just like old. And then, of course, we have a commitment to our communities and to our society and to the things that make our lives better. That includes our climate and our environment. So we brought all those requirements in together, as we always have done, which just makes the problem harder, in case you're wondering. And if you thought it was hard to figure out how to take a 100-year-old diesel engine company and make them a climate leader, you're right. It is challenging. It's not clear exactly what to do next, especially when you want to consider all those constituents. But I think Cummins, at least my perspective of working there was, we work best under a challenge. We turn a challenge into an opportunity. We say, hey, not only are we going to do that, but we're going to make it a growth opportunity. We're going to grow jobs at Cummins. We're going to create new revenue streams at Cummins. We're going to figure out how to meet all these requirements and do it while winning the whole way. And that's what we set up out in our strategy statement. And we're going to do that because we're going to start early. We're going to commit ourselves to it. No greenwashing. By the way, that was the first meeting I ever had on our 2050 climate change deal. I looked at, there was 40 people from Cummins, from all of the department. I said, it was my first rule: no greenwashing. I don't want to do any initiatives that sound good but don't do anything. None. Which of course made everybody crazy. No one liked that. I still think is my least popular statement in the entire thing. And just so you know, we are going to have to invest billions of dollars in this strategy. Billions of dollars. So with each incremental investment, we will be making choices that will be bet the whole company's equity on those choices. We'll make choices in battery technology, in hydrogen fuel cell technology, and new technologies for engines, each of which, if we get wrong, really wrong, let's say it that way, we'll be out of business. So there'll be significant choices to make to get right. So one thing that has been the wind underneath my sails, besides the long-standing values of the company, is this mission that we've got, that we want to be a sustainable company that makes our communities better because we're there. And that, again, I didn't invent that. I benefited from that from the very first day I joined the company. And because we had that, because we believe in this at our core, taking risks on new technology, figuring out how to steer the company in a different direction, I didn't have to fight my way through it. I didn't have to fight the board. I didn't have to fight my engineers. Everyone wanted a way to do it. They were looking for direction to get it done. They all wanted to figure out ways to take our business and move it more towards technologies of the future, lower carbon technologies, technologies that we could be proud to develop, that could make our community stronger because we were doing it. They didn't want to leave people behind. They wanted to make sure that they're realistic and practical, all those kinds of things, but they wanted to work on it. What I needed to do is figure out how to provide leadership to do it. And that's a lot better problem. There's so many places that I think about and that I come across in the Business Roundtable where they're fighting their own board or their own shareholders or their own employees to try to get with the program. And that's just a really, really, it makes just the problem that much harder. And I think I've been a real beneficiary of that. And you know, one of the other things I think that helped our plan is that in the early 90s, the Clean Air Act, regulations started to get published from the Clean Air Act that regulated commercial vehicle transportation, regulated air quality. And Cummins had to develop new emissions technologies to reduce NOx and particulate emissions from diesel engines. And sort of like this one, we had to invent some new technologies to do that, which cost us a lot of money, hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars to do. Some of which we got right, some of which we didn't get right. And that, but the effort in producing those technologies led us to growth, both domestically and internationally, which produced the company that's here today. So when I took over as CFO, our company was $5 billion in sales and lost money that year. Today, we're $25 billion in sales, and we haven't lost money since that year. So and most of that is because we grew more globally based on air emissions technologies we developed to meet the Clean Air Act. So in other words, the company has muscle memory to say, oh, that's right, investing in technologies that may not be easy and may be costly in the short run, but produce a better product in the future, a cleaner product, can yield good results. We can lead the industry and lead the world. Hey, let's do that again. So I had that muscle memory to build on. Very fortunate situation. Let's go to the next one. So let me back up a step. I told you that our strategy for climate change technologies is linked to our sustainability strategy. So I thought I should at least show you what that sustainability strategy, that 2050 pledge, I think it's the next page, by the way. Yeah, Planet 2050. So this is what we launched 10 years or so ago. And what we said is we are going to hit net zero by 2050. We also set standards for reducing significantly our carbon by 2030. And then we talked about the different categories under which we would address. And as you'd guess, we wanted to be inclusive with everybody in the company. We wanted to align ourselves. So we had facility strategies, you know, for reducing the carbon emissions of our facilities. We had things associated with our supply chain, all of which got, you know, so lots of people got involved. We had people working on things that sound like good things to do that aren't related to climate change, like how to get rid of single-use plastics and all these other things. Very good things to do, by the way. But the idea is you want everybody engaged. Everybody wants to play a role, so you get everybody in. Make no mistake, though, 99% of the carbon emissions of our company are our products. So, you know, us at the strategy level understood, like, we want everyone included, everyone doing really good things, and we were, but it was all about products, right? If you're going to change the world and the amount of carbon you're introducing. And we are Cummins is a meaningful part of carbon emissions globally. I think that's clear to everybody, right? We make diesel engines, and we are the biggest independent diesel engine maker in the world. So, and when you look at if you look at carbon producing and you look at commercial vehicles, it's a measurable part of all the carbon going out there, and we are a measurable part of the industry, and therefore you can measure yourself. It's not great to be able to measure yourself in this category, by the way. You're not happy about that, but it does mean that if you're not in the game for real, it's a problem. So again, we had no choice really to get with it. So once we kind of did the whole plan, the sustainability strategy, and decided that we were going to be all about affecting this 99% carbon emissions, we needed a strategy to do it. We had the mission statement, we had the values, we had the beliefs, we had a bunch of engineers that really wanted to get on with it. So what's the plan, Tom? What are we going to do? So Jen Rumsey and I went to work on our strategy, and we called it Destination Zero. Actually, Carol Casto, who works for us in the back, hi Carol, wherever you can. She's the Vice President of Communications and Marketing, and she's the one who came up with Destination Zero, not me. But anyway, we've taken credit for it since then. Destination Zero is our strategy, and I want to tell you now about Destination Zero. So let's go to the next one. First thing we ran into, Jen and I, that's it, is that it's complicated. So because we're not cars, it turns out that our products go into all kinds of different use cases. So this, by the way, this chart is hours of operation is on the x-axis, so that's how much it runs per year. And then how much horsepower it needs is on the y-axis. Cars is the blue one. And it turns out whether you drive a Chevy Suburban or a Prius, it's still way down there. The blue car only moves a tiny bit to the right if you have a Suburban, or sorry, up if you have a Suburban. It's immeasurable on this chart, the difference. So I'm not recommending that you all buy Suburbans. I'm just saying, like, for our chart, it doesn't matter. Cars are all the same. And when you have cars, you have one use case, essentially, which is good. That means we can use pretty much electric cars everywhere, and it'll be fine. Obviously, I've been some places in Wyoming in a rented Suburban. I probably would have not wanted an electric one. But most places you can use an electric car, and it'll be fine. And that's what's going to happen. These other guys, though, it's not so straightforward. It turns out when you're up on the right in that mine truck, and the batteries weigh more than everything the mine truck carries. It's not going to work so well. There's no battery technologies the truck will just fall forward, like just tip forward. That's too much weight. Can't work. So we need more than one technology. And even in trucks, you can see there's a couple of trucks there. The gap between those two trucks in terms of horsepower and hours per year may be the difference between whether you want to use fuel cells, hydrogen fuel cells, and batteries. And right now, that's one of the bets that we have to make, and if we get it wrong, I already told you what the consequence of that could be. So those are really, really important technology developments and bets to make about which one's it going to be. Because it turns out we make a lot of those truck engines and not so many of the other ones. So whatever that one needs, that's what we need to use those for the others, some of the others too, or we don't get enough volume. Some of these things we sell 1,000 a year. That's it. 500 a year even. So it's a challenging and complex technology to figure out. And people that tell you that there's one solution for all only have one solution to offer. That's why they tell you that. It's not going to be true. We're going to need multiple technologies to get this to work. So that's the first thing. Big challenge. All right. So next thing is that we have all of these technologies that exist today with infrastructure to support them. So the reason basically all commercial vehicles everywhere in the world run on diesel engines now. Diesel engines has won. It's the technology winner for the last 100 years. That wasn't always the case, by the way. When Cummins first started, we were competing with gasoline engines. Most trucks were running on gasoline engines, like cars. And then diesel engines turned out to be better. Better fuel economy, better durability and reliability, and they won. And they won everywhere. They are everywhere. There's diesel fuel everywhere. You can run and remember, these are running all the time, always hundreds of thousands of miles per year, all the time delivering food. Think for a second, if you were in Florida this week and you were needing water and food and all your trucks were battery, what would you do? You'd be thirsty because it wouldn't get there. But the infrastructure to support emergency vehicles, all kinds of transportation is very robust. When we move to the new carbon-free technologies, we need the similar kind of infrastructure. And without it, it's the technologies to make trucks go are irrelevant. So what are we going to do in the meantime? Are we just going to wait till all of our grid is green and there's plenty of charging stations everywhere and megawatt-style chargers enough to do hundreds of thousands of trucks per day, charge them? If we do, it'll be too late. So Jen and I's strategy that we developed was to say we have to push on both fronts at once. We need to push on our current technology and say less carbon every year more efficient diesel engines, because we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars today developing new engines, which they're still diesel, they just burn less fuel. Same technologies, way more efficient though, engines. That's a lot of money to get that right, because it's a pretty developed product. And then also introducing engines with new fuels. Natural gas is the most obvious, but now hydrogen and other fuels which may even get all the way to zero carbon fuel technology. So all of our new platforms, for example, will be fuel agnostic. They will run on multiple fuels, including zero carbon fuels, which means that with the current infrastructure, at least that's what the oil companies tell me, is that they can run zero carbon renewable fuels through their existing technology with some, again, billions of dollars of investment in those pipelines and things like that, but can be used, better than hundreds of billions. So then, and they can run those through, and then we can use those technologies as with existing infrastructure. And then we're also going to spend billions of dollars in hydrogen and battery and zero technology. So we're essentially investing in two separate streams. Current engines, current infrastructure, go like heck. New technologies, different infrastructure, go like heck. And the reason we're doing that is because we've calculated that if we wait for the infrastructure for charging and hydrogen to be there, versus if we do both at once, the difference by 2035 or 2040, I think we went out to 2040 with this analysis, was 1.4 gigatons in carbon, which is 3 years of no trucks running. So we'll save like 3 years of no trucks running of carbon by doing both. And so we said, that we got to do it. Start now. For Jen and I, the analogy was kind of like a compound interest problem. Waiting is bad because you're just building more carbon every day while not producing products with less carbon. And right now, if I produce a battery truck and I run on the current grid, it's worse from a carbon point of view based on coal-based electricity than if I do a diesel one. So, infrastructure does matter, in case you're wondering. All right, let's go to the next one. So, in addition to this question of us, spending our billions, developing our own strategy, there's this whole question about what are you doing to move the rest of the industry? And this is why I was started with this partnership between these two mayors, is because I'm 100% convinced there is no path to success for climate change, for our species, that does not involve partnerships and working together. It's too big of a problem, too hard. We have to begin to coordinate more. And so I basically decided from the very beginning that I was just going to talk to whoever would listen. So this is me at a congressional hearing at the top, showing that engines are bigger than a bread box. I don't know what I was doing with my hands, but anyway, the point is, congressional testimony, met with the president, anyone who invited, I said yes. And my answer to them was, you're moving too slow. Move faster. I supported the Inflation Reduction Act, even though I hate the tax section of it, hate it. It's a longer story, I won't go through that. But I did that because taxes schmaxes. I don't want our planet to burn up. And I just think all of us need to start thinking to ourselves like it's not really about me, though, anymore. It's about figuring out what we're going to do about this existential crisis. And sometimes that means we got to accept some sour stuff with our sweet stuff. It's not all going to be perfect. And that's what I guess I'm trying to get here, is we're all going to have to get in with new bedfellows and figure out how we get the thing moving. It's moving too slow. The grid, for example, is moving too slow, just not moving fast enough. I promise you I will have batteries that will be commercially viable, ready, before the grid will be green. I can commit you that. I will have hydrogen engines and fuel cells ready at commercially viable prices before we'll have a green hydrogen infrastructure in the US. I'll beat infrastructure every time. Even though it's billions, even though I don't even know how to do it yet, I will do it. And the reason is because infrastructure is too slow. So whenever you get the chance, partnerships, go, start building infrastructure. Last thing, everything is local. So I said to you at the beginning that, you know, we think about our job as a company to include our communities, that we think that matters to us. So while we want to work with congressional testimony and big technologies, we also want to work locally. Partly because we believe that it creates connection with our employees and our communities in a way that motivates them to come and work for Cummins for 30 years and solve really big problems like how to make a fuel cell. And part of it's because by working locally, we see everybody benefiting. So everybody thinks they have something in the game. So this was just one example I wanted to highlight because just I'm so proud of the employees. I just wanted to highlight to you. But this farm, Black Jewel Farm, is part of this initiative we started called Cummins Waterworks. We operate in a lot of water scarce areas around the world. And those water scarce areas are just getting worse and worse. I think you guys all know the statistics about water that are very concerning about availability of fresh water. So we launched this multi-million-dollar program. It's philanthropic. Cummins doesn't have any products to sell here, but we are doing work all over the world. And oftentimes I report things from India or Brazil or someplace. This is just in southern Indiana. And what we're working with is how to get nutrients out of the White River to make sure they don't flow into the Mississippi Basin and make the water undrinkable. And so we're working with this farm to put filtration stuff in. Again, I'm doing nothing other than full-on cheerleading with pom-poms, but our people are down there working with these farms, putting in filtration systems and figuring out how to make sure the water doesn't get undrinkable. So again, I just think I had the good fortune of leading a company that is the best in the world. I mean, it's really the greatest company ever. And I think it's going strength to strength. I think Jen's going to take it to a whole nother level. And we need as many partners as we can get. We need partners in our towns and our regions. We need partners in our state government, our federal government. We need technology partners. We need as many as we can get. So I really appreciate all of you putting your oar on the water too and trying to be part of the solution. So thank you very much. Do we have time for Q&A?
Maybe ask a couple of questions. So we have people walking around with microphones. So if you have a question that you would like to ask, I would ask that you put your hand up, and maybe I'll just start. Tom, thanks very much. Great presentation. You talk about partnerships for you, and you've talked a little bit about stakeholders. You have upstream stakeholders. You have downstream stakeholders. Can you talk a little bit about how you engage with them? And what challenges you may have run into, and how that's gone.
And are you thinking about suppliers and customers? Yes. Yeah. It's a great point, Alex, about our upstream and downstream partners. With customers, so we have customers that think us moving towards lower carbon technologies, and frankly, us working on emissions, they don't like that. They like I don't know if you've seen any of these social media things where people take their Dodge Ram engines and make them smoky. It's called rolling coal or something weird like that. Anyway, we have enthusiasts who like our products and like them the old way. And of course, we love our customers, all of them. But we are, we are undaunted. We are moving forward and doing our best to bring everybody with us. Part of that is giving people realistic solutions that they can adopt. I was recently with one of our customers, a fleet customer, biggest fleet in the country actually, and they wanted to put a set of electric trucks in California. California, of course, has a lot of incentives to put electric trucks in, and was really encouraging. And they got this contract to put in 50 trucks, and then they went to the utility and said, "Here, we want to put this charging station in for these trucks." And the utility said, "Well, we can give you enough electricity for 12 trucks." Which is, by the way, a lot of electricity, just in case you're wondering. Like, it's a big substation to do this. And they said, "Well, we got a contract for 50, though." And they said, "Yeah, we'll give you 12. That was the end of it. No more, 12. And their cost of electricity is 30 cents a kilowatt. 30 cents. So just in case you're wondering, that doesn't work out. So the truck's $500,000 versus $150,000 for a diesel truck. The electricity is more expensive than diesel by a long shot, and they can do 12. So that's the reality. That's the real thing. not the pretend thing. That ain't gonna work. So no matter how greedy corporations are or anything, there are no corporations, greedy or ungreedy, that are gonna do that deal, because they'll just be gone in 5 seconds. You won't be a corporation for very long. So that's what I meant by we gotta get people where they are and start moving the infrastructure. So what we are, so we're working with that fleet to figure out how we can offer them some battery technology, some natural gas, some renewable fuel, keep moving, because they want to move. They want to do things. They just can't do that. And suppliers, same thing. Suppliers, we are partnering with as many suppliers as we can get to provide us with new technologies. And frankly, since we can't do it all, we feel desperate, frankly, to find more suppliers that are willing to invest to develop technologies relevant to this topic. And by the way, I should have mentioned this at the start. The chocolate chip cookies are even better than the macaroons. Do the chocolate chip cookies. All right, what else? Other questions?
We've got one over here.
Please.
Thank you so much. That was a great presentation.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask you, one of the conversations I hear a lot happening at the state legislature level is about energy and reliability. And as a company that is heavily invested in renewable energy, and you've now just stated you want the grid to move faster, we hear a ton about how renewables are not reliable, and of course we beg to differ. What is your message to those policymakers on that issue?
Yeah, I think it's not, well, it's both. It's always. Like, of course, it isn't as reliable if you have wind and solar only and no backup, you have no storage at all and no other solutions. So, of course, you need to have storage and you need to have other solutions which are more expensive. So the answer, of course, is it's more expensive, the energy. It just is. I mean, carbon-rich solutions are cheaper. It's that simple. They are cheaper. Now, they won't, eventually they might not be, but for the next 20 years, they'll be cheaper. So the question is, do we as a nation have the political will to say, yeah, but we're gonna burn the place up? So, yeah, okay, I'll just have to spend that money there and not somewhere else. The studies that I've looked at says our economy can afford to make this transition. It's trillions of dollars. But we can afford it. Not in 1 year, by the way, it's over 20 years, but we can afford it. And I think we can partially afford it by being a leader, by moving quicker and being a leader in these technologies and exporting them to other countries for benefit to our economy. But I also think we can afford it anyway. It's just we're going to have to be willing to take the price increases that come with it. I've been a big advocate for carbon taxes for that reason. I recognize that carbon taxes are regressive. I get that. And I think we need to do things to subsidize poorer families and people that are less able to pay for it. But by not having carbon taxes, people don't change their buying behavior. So my argument to them is, of course, we can make it more. We can make renewable grid reliable. It just costs money. And what we should do is make the investments and save our planet.
Hi, I'm with the Bloomington Economic Development Corporation.
Hi.
And a few years ago, I heard an industry presentation that Cummins gave that made it very accessible, what you all are doing. Because I think going into the presentation, one could say, well, they could do it. They're huge, sure. But I really came away with an impression of, like, anyone could do this regardless the size of their organization. Could you talk some about those steps that you took and how those translate to anyone wherever they sit?
Boy, that's a good question. Here's what I would say. I think it fits a little bit with what I was just saying, is that I would just say to anybody, if you run a business of any size, you still have to face your grandkids. You still have to ask yourself, when you had your moment, what did you do? Because I fear, no matter what we do, we will still be dealing with effects of climate change no matter what. Like, we won't be able to go fast enough that there'll be no impact. We will be mitigating as well as avoiding, no question. So because we will be mitigating, things will be worse, and our grandkids will know it. Our kids will know it. And so they'll ask you, what'd you do? And if your answer is, well, I made a lot of money or something, that's just not going to do it. So I think no matter what size you are, you have to face the basic question of like, how do you feel about what role you played? And so I think that just makes the question of what to do clear. You got to go. Now, how to do it, in my opinion, is everyone I hire under 35 is already committed. It's really by people over 35 that I'm really trying to convince. But I think you can hire talent better. I think it's easier to hire talent and easier to motivate talent when you're trying to find solutions. And that, of course, improves your business. You know, when you can attract and retain young, talented people with promises of working on things that are important like climate change, then that helps your business. So you get a talent boost right away. And then the last thing I'd say is that everybody's looking for partners. So if you are a company that's relatively small or relatively modest in resources, but you have some good ideas, everyone's looking for partners. Go get a partner who has got more money. And the only thing I would say about money in this space is there's more money than there are good ideas. There is a lot of money running around looking for climate change solutions. Larry Fink's got a big pile of it, but they're looking for solutions, and they don't have as many good ideas as they have money. Time for one more. Done. I think I'm getting the hook. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your attention. I really appreciate your being here and being part of this. Thanks again, mayors, for the partnership and for inviting me today. I really appreciate it. Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. Thank you to the Cummins team, too. And I know there's a member of the Cummins team here who just started 5-6 weeks ago, and I understand she joined Cummins because of your sustainability work. So, case in point. I'm going to invite the panel up. We're already behind, which is terrible, so I'm getting like wild waving from the back. Why don't we bring the next panel up? While we're doing that, introduce yourselves to each other at the table if you don't know each other. Yeah. I can introduce from up here on this side. Okay. As a reminder, after the panel discussion, we'll have a mic circulating. If you'd like to ask a question, you can raise your hand, and also we have a link on the screen that you can enter your questions along the way. So we will have those at the end. Today's first panel will explore the implications of climate change for communities in South Central Indiana. Panelists will discuss the current and future risks that climate change presents to that region's economy, infrastructure, and quality of life. I'd like to welcome our panelists today. Dr. Gabe Filipelli is an American biochemist and Chancellor, Professor of Earth Science at Indiana University, Purdue University, IUPUI. He also serves as the Executive Director of the Indiana University Environmental Resilience Institute and Director of the Center for Urban Health at IUPUI. His research interests include biochemical cycling in the government and the impacts of climate change on the environment and human health, including human exposures to harmful environmental components. He's written for a variety of major journals, including Nature, Science, and Geology, among others. He currently serves as Editor-in-Chief for GeoHealth. Welcome. Shannon Cooke is the Director at Bartholomew County Emergency Management. As the Director, she oversees the day-to-day operations of the agency and provides overall support to Bartholomew County during emergencies. Shannon has worked in emergency management for the last 20 years, serving as a district field coordinator for the Indiana Department of Homeland Security, after starting her career as the deputy director for Bartholomew County Emergency Management in 2002. Welcome, Shannon. And Vic Kelson, my colleague, has served as the director of the City of Bloomington Utilities since 2016. The department provides wastewater and stormwater services in the City of Bloomington. He holds a PhD in environmental science from Indiana University Bloomington and a BS in engineering from Colorado School of Mines. He's an Indiana professional engineer and a certified groundwater professional. So, welcome everybody.
I think you got this, don't you?
Huh?
I think you've got this, don't
Is
you?
this thing on?
I don't
Thank
know.
you. I'm going to start with you, Gabe. Can you tell us about the climate impacts that pose the highest risk to our local communities in South Central Indiana? How are these impacts likely to affect the regional economy and quality of life?
Great, thank you for the question. And we already heard a lot about the concern about climate change. And I think the reason why we're seeing that concern is it's gone from a scientifically theoretical impact on communities to very real, tangible impact on communities right here and right now. And so the work of the Indiana University Environmental Resilience Institute is to use the best science that we understand, sometimes even at the regional climate projection level, to provide assistance for communities to grapple with that real world issue, right? Mayor Hamilton said climate change isn't going away. In fact, it's actually going to get worse. And so, like in all situations that are getting worse, you need to start building in sort of your insurance plan to deal with how worse it's going to get now. I mean, we're thinking about infrastructure build-outs, right? The horrible disaster that Hurricane Ian wrought upon Florida. There's an example of a state that had infrastructure that was compatible for non-vicious hurricanes, but certainly not an electrical grid that sustained through it, a transportation grid, or even a health services grid that sustained through it. So these are the kinds of challenges the communities face, right? So honing in here on Indiana, what are our unique challenges? Some of these were alluded to early on, is that the atmosphere is going a little bit strange on us, and we can now predict how strange it is. It's going strange in that our pressure zones, you've all seen weather, you know what a high pressure zone is, what a low pressure zone is, and so forth. Our pressure zones are strengthening and stalling. So they're stalling over given locations. And what's that's causing in Indiana is droughts and what we call flash droughts and flash floods. And the flash floods, a result of flash floods, are ones that are grappling with quite a bit here is extreme flooding. We're trying to understand how to grapple with that and how to help cities build short and long-term plans to grapple with that, because that's going to be the biggest economic impact. And if you talk about insurance payouts in this country, flooding is the biggest issue that we have. That's the most expensive disaster we face.
Which ties us well, actually, into the next question, Shannon. So what changes have you observed with extreme weather events in Bartholomew County and South Central Indiana? How has the prevalence and severity of hazards been changing?
I think he pretty much answered a lot of my question for me as far as what we're seeing. So the flash flooding is something we've seen across southern and central Indiana. Even this year, a couple of weeks ago, earlier this last month, we saw 10 inches of rain in 3 hours in southern Indiana that caused a lot of damage down there. So we're seeing those extremes, like he said. We're either getting very significant rainfall in short amount of time to the, we may start out with that early in the year, and then it transitions into that very dry drought conditions for the rest of the year, which makes it very difficult. So, that's kind of what we're seeing through here and what we have to plan for. Where we've always had to deal with that in the past, as he, spoke to, we're seeing that in more extreme, impacts on us in short term, in growing more intense probably. As Mr. Leinberger said earlier, we're going to see it get worse as time goes on. So that's what we need to look at now. How is it impacting us now? How do we need to plan? Who do we need to have as our partners at the table to help us plan for that? And a lot of the people that we have at the table with us now are utilities, our elected officials, our private businesses that we deal with now, and are our partners. We need to continue to have them at the table and learn if there's anybody else that we need to bring in to help us to do that planning in the future, and how is that going to get worse, and how do we project that and plan for it before it's here.
Yep, this idea of partnership seems to be already taking hold. Thank you for that, Shannon. Vic, what are the risks of these climate impacts on local infrastructure, especially stormwater and roadway and electrical infrastructure?
Anybody here live in Bloomington? Anybody here who lives in Bloomington knows that we're in in the late stages of tearing up downtown. The reason we're doing that is because we've had undersized stormwater infrastructure on the Clear Creek channel going through downtown. So that culvert was built more than 100 years ago. It's badly undersized. Part of that is because of build out in the basin. There's a lot more impervious surface than there was, but a lot of it's also because of just these much larger storms that we've seen. June of 2021, we're in the middle of the project to prevent this problem, but we flooded Kirkwood. The water got to be 4 or 5 feet deep. In some places, cars were floating up on the curbs. Businesses were shut down for weeks dealing with the situation, and that was just one flash flood over 2 blocks of a very populated portion of town. We expect that the project that we're completing over the next couple of years will make that particular storm not be an issue, but there's another storm coming. And someone asked me what causes floods, and I said too much water. But the thing is, it doesn't matter how robust your infrastructure is, there's always a bigger storm waiting for you. And you don't know when it's going to come, but you've got to be ready to mitigate whatever is coming your way in this business. So stormwater is going to continue to be a problem, and it's going to be an expensive problem for communities in central Indiana.
More water, does that come with a PhD? So I'm going to open it up, maybe just to get us going on questions, and I would encourage anybody in the room who'd like to ask questions to put your hand up and or submit them, and we will get a mic to you. So I'll start maybe with a general question of how do you use climate data in your everyday work?
Well, that's sort of a ringer for me. We use it as in our everyday work. The way that we use it is actually we've been able to take climate models that are more regional and downscale them to the size of the state of Indiana, which shows significant differences from the north side of the state to the south side of the state, both in precipitation and in temperature. And so that helps us inform how we advise communities that we work with and companies and non-for-profits, how we advise them about their risk. We have something called the Hoosier Resilience Index. It's a way to measure what are they prepared for, what are they not prepared for. Are they prepared for the 1,000-year flood, which now seems to come every 10 years, or not? Or are they prepared for heat waves? Do they have the right kind of infrastructure to handle that? So yeah, that was an easy one for me, just because we use it literally every single day.
And Shannon, how about you?
We do a little of the same as far as taking the information, what weather is coming into the community, what do we need to prepare the citizens for, our responders for, do we need to move anything around? It also is involved in our mitigation planning. We look, we rate our hazards, how are those moving? Was flash flood, maybe not our high priority before where it is now, or higher at least on the index. And what do we need to do to prepare for that? And do we have the resources in place to respond and recover from that? So that's kind of how we use the information there.
Vic, anything to add?
There was a remark earlier today about the need to mitigate and to understand what's coming. We are a water utility, and we get our water out of Lake Monroe. One of the issues that when you have big storms, you have large surges of nutrients and sediment and other things that can end up in waterways, that can end up in the lake. That affects the lake water quality over the long term. There was a remark just a moment ago about summer droughts. One of the things that, I've lived in Indiana a long time, one of the patterns that we're used to is lines of thunderstorms coming through every couple of weeks during the summer. The last 2 summers, we haven't had that. The last 2 summers, we've seen 5-6 weeks of beautiful blue skies, which are really nice to see every morning. But when it turns into a large algal bloom at the end of the summer, and all of a sudden the water tastes funny, or worse, one day we may have trouble with algal toxins, and we're going to have to deal with that. So, I'm in the water business. We're at the end of this whole process, and we're trying to make drinking water. And the question isn't whether, for Bloomington anyway, the question isn't whether we're going to be able to make drinking water. It's what's it's going to cost, and what are going to be the other problems that we're dealing with as we're doing it. Other communities, Columbus and Nashville both have wells. You're going to be dependent on flows in the East Fork of the White River. If those flows go down because you have a significant drought, you can have lower water levels in that aquifer system over there. Or similarly, in Brown County, you'll have the same kinds of problems. So regionally speaking, Indiana in general has enough water. The question is whether it's going to land at the times we want it and whether it's going to land in the quantities we want it at the times that we want it. And I think that's going to become less reliable for everyone. And we're lucky to have the big lake. But one of the side effects of the big lake is long periods of time when algae can grow and can lead to really poor water quality at times. And so we may have to add additional treatment capabilities or maybe even do some in situ mixing in the lake to try and prevent those blooms.
Thanks, Vic. So I'm going to open it up to questions from the room. We have one over here, it looks like.
Hi, can you hear me? Thank you, Vic. I'm Sherry Mitchell-Brooker for Friends of Lake Monroe, so I was very happy to hear that acknowledgement of the impacts of climate change on algal blooms, which is very important. I think it's interesting, Mr. Leinberger was talking about that you have to look at the short term and you have to look at the long term. And so we hear a lot of talk about the mitigation, which I think, we're so worried about, this flood that's going to happen next week or next year, and we don't know when it's going to happen and so forth. But, and in the case of the algal blooms too, it's, are we focusing on the treatment? Are we focusing on the long-term problems with the source? And so I'm curious how you look at the trade-off between the expensive things that you might have to do to reduce carbon emissions compared to the expensive things that you do for mitigation, and how do you make those decisions?
Is that for me? That's it for. Well, we are working on trying to reduce our carbon emissions. Our largest carbon emitter is the Dillman wastewater plant. It's the largest electrical customer in Monroe County. It also, the very purpose of that plant is to take carbon that's in the water when we get it and turn it into CO2. That's why we built the place. We can't make that part go away, but we can work to reduce the emissions from electrical generation that supplies the plant. So what we've done so far is we have made investments. We've put solar panels at the plant. That reduced electrical demand by about 15%. We've recently completed a major renovation and improvement in the plant, replacing blowers with more efficient blowers, adding closed loop control and things like that. That will also reduce our electrical demand over time. But what else do we need to do? Well, believe it or not, we've got tens of millions of dollars that we could invest in the collection system infrastructure that sends the water to the wastewater plant. Because every drop of rainwater that ends up in the sewer turns into wastewater, and then we have to treat it. So we're constantly looking at these kinds of things, both on the water side and the wastewater side. But we have to be more efficient in everything we do. But we also, at the same time, have to keep our operation going. So we're constantly at odds with figuring out which way to go in terms of these priorities. About this, by the way, and it's something to keep in mind, we can't fix Bloomington's climate. We can't fix central Indiana's climate. We can only make a contribution that will help improve the world's climate. And so we're always going to have to mitigate, but we have to be thinking about the long-term big picture too.
One thing, if you don't mind, kind of playing off of that, is that in our view, you sort of have to do both, right? And one of the problems, I'll take Indianapolis as an example, where we're almost done, well, 3/4 done with a large stormwater infrastructure project to reduce the combined sewer outflows to local rivers to meet EPA guidelines, right? That's a really good thing to do, but we've built this tube, this massive tube, that is not resilient to any of the climate changes that already have occurred. We built it to 2,000 specs, and we already have 16% more extreme rainfall events now than we did in 2000. We expect about another 16% in the next 18 years, right? So it's the minute that thing is turned on, it's under capacity. And that's because this idea that we can, and this is, I think, important for the cities that you work with, small and large, the idea that you can engineer a fixed capacity system to deal with climate change, which is going to keep pushing these fixed capacity systems, right, from almost every direction. So you need to build resilience into that. So what's a resilient technology for a fixed capacity stormwater infrastructure? Well, build green technologies around it. Find those areas that you can allow to be wetlands, to be even seasonal wetlands. Well, what do you have to do with that? Well, a little bit of science to understand what are the most absorbent parts of your city to reduce the stormwater input, plus zoning laws that incentivize that instead of building an apartment high-rise, right? So these are I think we're going to get that in the panel 3, or 2 or something, about talking about how you actually, why all these partnerships that are here are so critical. Science alone is not going to get us there, obviously. You need the science to inform the viable solution, but you need the community's voices, you need technologies, but also I always try to emphasize green technologies. Nature's given us a lot of lessons. They've already engineered the planet. It's been spending 4.5 billion years to do that, and there are solutions out there.
Questions from the room or from the online platform, if it's working?
Is this on? Okay. We have one question from the online platform to wrap up, and it is, what informational resources would you each recommend for learning about climate change for the average person?
I'll jump in, eri.iu.edu. It has everything you need to know, quite honestly, about model projections locally, simple explanations about climate change science, and about the work that communities can do. We highlight and elevate the communities that we work with their own genuine story. So that would be the easiest one.
That was good, perfect timing. For ours, I would go with either FEMA.gov for some of the information that they have out there, or the National Weather Service, both good partners for us, and the information that they put out there that we take from them.
Oh boy, there's lots of places. Certainly the 2 places you were talking about, in terms of just understanding the climate crisis, I was actually one of the presenters for the Climate Project when it first started up. I got to spend a few days with Vice President Gore doing the training. And they're still around. The Climate Reality Project is still around, doing a lot of information for more or less for lay people to understand what's going on and understand how technologies might be deployed. So I would certainly give a shout out to them. I still get emails and everything from them, and I keep up with them a little bit.
Okay, Gabe, Shannon, Vic, thanks so much for your time today. Let's give them a hand. So we're going to take a 5-minute break. We're going to try to catch up here a little bit. I gather there's a little competition between cookie types, so I think now's the time to figure out which one is right. Why don't we see you back here at 2:15? Thanks. All right, we're going to get going with the second panel. Welcome back, everyone. For our next panel, we will be covering the ways public and private sector has addressed climate risks. The panel will discuss the role of local governments and accessing federal government funding opportunities for climate initiatives, as well as the business case for climate action and trends within new environmental social governance standards. I'd like to welcome our panelists. Dr. Aaron Delotte is an assistant professor at Indiana University's O'Neill School of Public and Environmental Affairs and a faculty affiliate of the IU Environmental Resilience Institute and Ostrom Workshop. He directs the Metropolitan Governance and Management Transitions Laboratory. His research focuses on the roles that public managers play in enhancing economic, environmental, and social sustainability at the local and metropolitan level, with the goal of building cumulative knowledge which can help local governments advance sustainable economic and community development. Carrie Garvin is the Executive Director of the Greater Indiana Clean Cities, Inc., a standalone nonprofit advancing communities with education and resources on alternative fuel vehicles across the state of Indiana. Greater Indiana assists local, state, and federal government agencies, universities, equipment manufacturers, fuel providers, and other key stakeholders with grants, research, events, project coordination, marketing, fleet planning, and outreach activities to increase the use of alternative fuels, transportation, and infrastructure. Carrie is a frequent speaker and panelist at industry events, sharing information about Greater Indiana, alternative fuels and transportation, funding opportunities, and resources. Kelly Eskew is a clinical professor of business law and ethics at the Indiana University Kelley School of Business. She has won numerous teaching awards for her innovative courses in climate law, sustainability law, business and poverty alleviation, business ethics, and business and human rights. Professor Eskew runs service learning projects in her courses that connect students to real-world projects for clients addressing sustainability and climate issues. Kelly Karn is Vice President, Regulatory Affairs and Policy for Duke Energy Indiana. Kelly joined the company in 1998 while in law school and was promoted to counsel in 2000. In 2006, she assumed the position of lead Indiana Regulatory Counsel for Duke Energy after shepherding the approval of the Synergy Duke Energy merger through the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission. Kelly was promoted to Deputy General Counsel in 2008. In this role, she managed attorneys and advised the company on regulatory, legislative, and policy matters in Indiana. As VP Regulatory Affairs and Policy, reporting to the state president, Karn has responsibility for regulatory relations with Indiana state agencies and key policy and strategic priorities for Duke Energy Indiana. And finally, Ben Swanson, co-founder of Secretly Group, Dead Oceans, I'm gonna have a problem with that, Jaguar, Satisfactory Records, and Secretly Canadian, should have practiced that one. Secretly Publishing, All Flowers Group, Ghostly International, Drink Some Water, and Secretly Distribution. Am I showing my age yet? Because it's, and is also a partner in Numero Group and 37D03D. All right, I got that one right. Originally from Fargo, North Dakota, Ben graduated from Indiana University with a degree in ethnomusicology. He now resides in Bloomington, Indiana, having helped turn the Midwestern city into a launching pad for independent artists. In addition to his work in the music industry, he is also a board member of the Dimension Mill, a large co-working and business incubator space located in downtown Bloomington, Indiana. So welcome, everyone. So I'm going to start with some prompts here. Aaron, can you tell us about ways local governments have approached climate change and trends in Indiana for local sustainability governance? How successful have these approaches been?
Thanks for the question. I think I have some slides at some point here. Oh yeah, there we go, great. Can't come to a talk without some slides. So for the last 2+ years, my lab at IU O'Neill has been conducting a National Science Foundation study on Indiana local government sustainability. And so we're doing several things. We're looking at the planning process, looking at how plans are being implemented, and then ultimately looking at how, what kinds of performance outcomes local governments are able to generate. And so I think we have to begin this conversation with a few caveats, one of which is that Indiana, as you all are aware, is a skeptical state when it comes to planning. The state abolished its planning agency in 1981, and the state is one of the most restrictive in terms of state government preemptions of local government activity, one of the tops in the country. Despite that, there is a lot of planning activity that is going on, and one of the things we were trying to study in this survey that we just administered is how those plans are being translated into action. So if we could advance the slides here really quickly. Two things relevant for this panel, I think. One, how much activity are local governments doing with the private sector, with businesses to try and encourage sustainable economic development? Here we see the survey indicating that Indiana local governments are not doing as much as the national average. So these red numbers are all lower than what we would see if we administered this survey nationally. So only 14.7% have built partnerships with the business community to achieve sustainability goals. Just under 11% have linked environmental goals to publicly financed incentive tools that we use to attract or retain businesses. And then a smaller subset of that, less than 5%, have used things like density bonuses or property tax credits to try to encourage energy efficient building. So there's a lot of room to grow in that regard. Next slide, please. So the other thing that I wanted to note is that we also are seeing kind of less than the national average in terms of collaboration across governments. 36% of the respondents to our survey had indicated they did join some kind of regional partnership, but only 10% have worked with other local governments, agencies, or a university institute to develop a GHG inventory, and approximately 7% had entered into any kind of an agreement with another local government on climate or energy issues. Those are very small numbers. The glass half full version of that is that there's a lot of room to grow here, right? And so the last thing I'll point out really quickly, if we want to skip to the next slide, is we asked what are the barriers? Give them a long list of barriers to doing more of these projects. And 4 out of the top 5 barriers that cities have identified deal with capacity. It's not having enough staff, it's not having the right staff, it's not having enough information to know how to get the right staff. And these things are, again, kind of capacity building issues that Indiana communities have to address. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. Carrie, how has the federal government created opportunities to address climate change through the Infrastructure and Inflation Reduction Acts? How do these funding opportunities help both local governments and private sector organizations?
Thank you. So I'm sure everyone, I'm going to move this closer, maybe. Thank you. I'm sure everyone has been keeping track of the billions of dollars in investment available through IIJA and the IRA. In transportation alone, there's over $131 billion of funding for transportation projects, and I think everyone else can agree that that's a huge amount of funding. What's coming out of this is the money that's needed for infrastructure that you heard Tom talking about. You can't deploy these types of technologies and vehicles without the infrastructure. So there's been a large investment through the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program. There's formula funding going to every single state in the US, and they all had to submit state plans for federal approval. So Indiana will be expecting $100 million over the next 5 years to put in DC fast chargers along the interstates. So we can see that taking shape. What's also coming out of this is $2.5 billion in discretionary funding. So if you are not along that interstate, there will be funding for community charging, public transit, and school buses. I think it was just last week the EPA announced that they're increasing the amount of funding for their zero-emission buses to $965 million. So this is very significant. We haven't seen this type of investment in alt-fuel vehicles or infrastructure ever. So I think there's opportunities for everyone to work together and decide what types of projects you want to tackle. Right now, we ourselves, Greater Indiana, we're wrapping up 2 fleet analysis projects, one for the city of Fort Wayne and one for the city of Indianapolis. So we're looking at what vehicles are in their system, what are they wanting to switch to, what can they afford to switch to, and then what that looks like both in short and long term. Because you cannot address your emission reduction or a climate action plan without acknowledging that transportation is right now the largest contributor of greenhouse gas emissions in the US. I think it's 27% of the share. So you have to start looking at your operations in transportation. What's the level of investment in infrastructure and how do you get there? So nice thing is there's funding, so start looking at it and what you can do to make that happen.
Thanks, Carrie. Because we have a 2 Kelly panel, I'm going to call Kelly Eskew up first by last name. When discussing the overlap of businesses and climate change, terms like environmental social governance standards and climate disclosure reports have often been mentioned. Could you characterize the various ways that businesses have been addressing climate change within their organizations and operations and in partnership with the community?
Sure, thank you very much. I always say that I can talk for 75 minutes without notes, but I can't talk for 5 minutes without notes, so I have notes. And a legal pad, because got to have a legal pad. You can borrow mine later. Okay. Things that companies are doing, they're doing greenhouse gas inventories. So they're looking at scope 1, scope 2, and for the larger companies, scope 3 emissions. It's hard for small companies to measure scope 3 emissions. It's hard for them to get their suppliers and distributors to provide them with the data they need to do scope 3 emissions assessments, but they're working on that. They're doing some form of life cycle analysis, and that lines up very nicely with greenhouse gas emissions, but looking at all of the inputs into their products and services, and all of those wasteful outputs, and looking at ways to reduce. When you're reducing waste, you're usually reducing your emissions. They're doing materiality assessments, so they're going out and they're surveying all of the stakeholders within their value chain. So employers, managers, employees, managers, their suppliers, their distributors, the communities in which they're working, about how stakeholders perceive their climate risks and what is most important to those stakeholders. And this is helpful for strategy, it's helpful for resource allocation, and it is really important for measuring performance. So we always say in the business school, you can't manage what you don't measure. So that first step is the measurement that happens with materiality assessments. We see publicly traded companies starting to do a lot more to prepare for the impending SEC disclosure rules. So the SEC disclosure rules are going to require companies to issue reports on how climate has a material impact on their operations, to put that in their audited financial statements, and to require board expertise on it. So I just spoke earlier today on how boards can start to build their expertise around climate and sustainability, and that's something that they're doing. But even if the SEC disclosure rules get shut down by the Supreme Court, and frankly, I think the Supreme Court will try to do that by saying they don't have legal authority, they don't have legislative authority to issue them. I worked on a project through ERI. My students and I worked with ERI to do some case studies, and we talked to Indiana businesses and publicly traded businesses with a large Indiana presence. We were doing some case studies on what they're doing around climate, and what the publicly traded companies said to me was, we're worried if we do this case study with you, and we love to work with you, that if it's public and our investors see we're not moving fast enough on managing our climate risk, that they will pull their money out of our company and look elsewhere. So with or without SEC disclosure rules, publicly traded companies are realizing that they need to manage climate risk because investors are paying attention to it. And I'll just quickly mention that for cost-benefit analysis, there are companies that are becoming less reliant on the grid, working on solar installations and other microgrid initiatives. A lot of the ag companies in Indiana are looking to make their products more resilient to extreme weather. And engaging employees in all kinds of projects. Your employees always know better than the managers do what's going on in the company and where you can reduce, and engaging those employees in reducing waste and reducing emissions.
Thanks, Kelly. That's great. Kelly Karn. How has Duke committed to addressing climate change, and how has Duke partnered with local communities on their climate and sustainability goals?
Thank you. So at Duke Energy, we have a net zero goal of net zero by 2050 corporate-wide. For Indiana, specifically, that translates into 63% reduction by 2030 in our carbon emissions for our Indiana generation, and 88% by 2040. So that's the plan that we're working towards now. We reevaluate that plan on a regular basis as well. The primary way we're doing that is looking at our coal retirement dates and moving those up in a gradual way, and replacing that with things like cleaner burning natural gas and a lot of renewables. So solar, wind, and storage. I think over the next 20 years, we have over 7,000 megawatts that we're adding to our system on clean energy resources for Indiana. In fact, just today, Duke Energy has updated its climate report, and we had an update on our energy transition for some of our investors. And so kind of hot breaking news, we are well on our path to meeting the corporate goal, which is 50% carbon reduction by 2030. We're on our way to exceed that. And we've also added another interim goal for 2040. So 80% carbon reduction by 2040, corporate-wide, on our way to that net zero by 2050. And within the last year, one of the other things that we've worked hard and looked at is our Scope 2 and our Scope 3 emissions. And so we've also added an interim goal looking at both upstream and downstream impacts of what our industry does. And we have a 50% reduction of our Scope 2 and Scope 3 emissions by 2035. And so our net zero by 2050 is all inclusive. It's Scope 1, 2, and 3 goals. So it's an ambitious goal to get there, and we're working on it every day on the best way to get there. In terms of partnerships, some things that we've done at Duke Energy is worked to provide some funding for local communities. The Indiana Resiliency Cohort, there were at least 14 communities working to do their, Bloomington being one of them, looking to do their greenhouse gas inventories and their plans, and we helped to fund some of that initially as well.
That's great. Thanks for the late breaking news. And Ben, finally, on the prompts, why and how did Secretly Labeling Group commit to being climate positive?
Well, we did it because it's sustainability has always been core to one of our values since, my brother and I, who's also my business partner, we're in high school and first got into recycling and, way back in the 90s. And, we tried various things through the years, a lot of like really misguided things, and tried to, institute it, and but was really unfocused. But we always deeply cared about it, and our artists that we work with really care about it as well. And so a couple of years ago, we decided to get, actually, be really intentional about it and focus on it and bring in an expert. So we partnered with a sustainability consultant to look at our scopes 1 through 3 emissions, and encountered a lot of the problems that Aaron pointed out along the way, the staffing and the measurements, and I can't remember, but basically your entire last slide. And it's, I will say it's taken a lot of work, and it's still very much a journey. But I think, for us, it came to be like, for a long time, we were sort of waiting for either the technology or government or some other thing to come along to sort of lead the way, and no one was coming. And so at a certain point, we felt like we cared about it deeply enough, and maybe perhaps even a little bit too late, but like that we just really felt like we needed to dig into it. And so that's what we've been doing. And I will say, it does take a tremendous amount of work, so I think there's a tremendous opportunity for some business to come in and make that easier. Perhaps Duke can get involved in that, on some aspects of that. But I will say, I like numbers and very specific because it's really hard, but like the scopes 1 and 2 for most individuals and for most businesses, perhaps not all, are way cheaper than you think. We have 6 facilities across the world. We spend $5,000 a year on RECs and offsets. For our scale of business, it's not that much. For a lot of smaller businesses, it will be way smaller than that. So it is totally attainable. It's just taking that leap from measuring and figuring out where, what that first step is extremely difficult. So I think there's also a real marketing problem there that actually I think, frankly, the government or the local governments could get involved in helping connect people. So, yeah.
That's great. So as always, we will open up to questions in the room. So if you have any questions, put your hand up, and I will start with one of my questions. Oh, there is a question over there.
Hi there. I had a question for Kelly Kern. I think it's great for us to look at alternative sources of energy, but we can also conserve energy. For example, maybe we don't need the air conditioning going in this room right now because it's a beautiful day outside. But my question is for Duke. Is Duke doing anything to incentivize customers to conserve, like a progressive rate structure? So like if you use X amount of energy, you pay this amount, and then if you use more than that, then you pay that amount per unit, yada, yada. That's my question.
Sure, thank you. So yeah, at Duke Energy, we have looked at kind of the supply side resources as well as what can we do on the demand side. And so we've had really a full suite of energy efficiency programs that our customers can take advantage of for residential, commercial, and even our largest industrial type customers to help their homes be more efficient. Things like weatherizing the home, incentives for new HVAC that are higher efficient than what's required by the law, those types of things. So there's programs like that for sure. On the more kind of innovative rate side, we've just recently are in the process of piloting some rates around time of use in particular. So trying to target customers to not be using energy at the peak times of day when energy is highest priced for us to produce, but rather kind of moving that energy usage, doing the laundry in the evenings instead of at the middle of the afternoon kind of incentives. So there's beginning to be some of that. I don't think we're completely there yet. Most of our customers are on kind of average across the board rates, but we're looking at kind of what is customer interest in some different rate structures by piloting different ones as we go.
Other questions? I have another one. I'm going to add, this is kind of open to everybody, and maybe you can all chime in. What are important considerations for businesses as they start exploring options to get involved with climate efforts? So Ben, you talked already about maybe perception, right? What are other?
I mean, I think it's something most people. I would venture to guess most people care about these days, especially in a town like Bloomington, for instance. And I think it is like the small things matter, and taking those first steps matter. I also think it's kind of a little bit of and talking about it. There is things like this, but it's just, I don't know, there's not, what we found is like it's very lonely out there as a business trying to figure it out on yourself, and there's no one we can really talk to, like, how did you do it and learn from? And then part of that is it's still so nascent, but I think there's just not that community. So I think, if people are just sort of taking the first easy steps and, maybe I think Duke offers, like, you can click a button and turn on the renewable, the green energy thing. Like, even if it's just that, I think it's, what hung us up most of the time is like it's easy to go down the rabbit hole and you want to be super clean about it and get to 100% right away. And it's, the revelation was that it's more of a journey than a single issue topic or issue.
Kelly Askew, I'm going to call you out because you're in the business school.
I am in the business school. Yeah, I'm sometimes surprised I'm in the business school. I will say that a thing I think is very important for particularly larger businesses, all businesses are trying to attract customers and trying to attract investment, but larger businesses is these sustainability reports that you see on everybody's webpage. They're beautiful. They have lots of gorgeous pictures in them. Sometimes they have some numbers as well. Those need to be honest. And you really need to involve the whole company in making sure that those are telling a true picture about what you're doing. And you probably need to be honest about the challenges that you're facing. And one of the reasons is, I'm an attorney by training, is we are seeing in other countries trends of investors suing businesses over their sustainability reports and what they're putting out there publicly because they're relying on those in making investments. And if those aren't accurate, then it can get them into some litigation trouble. So businesses need to be evaluating what they're doing. They need to be sharing what they're doing in a positive way. There's lots of positive stories out there, but they need to make sure that they're accurate and honest and that they're involving the whole company in doing the review and educating people that work in the company.
Anybody else want to jump in? I don't know, Kelly, if you've got business programs for business customers, or what if you want to add anything.
Yeah, I guess I would say that for Duke Energy at least, it's really sort of taking the cue from our customers, our investors, other stakeholders. For us, being a highly regulated utility, our regulatory commissions are going to play a big role in how we transition to clean energy over time. So there is some education piece involved in it as well, because all of those groups need to understand, and things work best when you're kind of going along the same path together. And we're seeing interest in moving more towards more clean and sustainable energy resources from all of those groups.
You want to jump in?
I can jump in. Yeah. So earlier I mentioned the looking at the short and long-term advantages of switching out to alternative fuels. And so I think any business is always looking at projections or looking at what revenue is coming in, where are their costs going. I can tell you that without a doubt, if you are sending your employees out, if you have any vehicles in your fleet, you are spending money. You're spending money on maintenance, you're spending money on fuel, and obviously purchasing or acquiring those vehicles. And so it does add up, as anyone who's tracking that stuff within your municipalities will know. And being able to bring that all together in-house and look at what it is going to cost you in the next 5 years, and then what it looks like to transition to an alt-fuel. 9 times out of 10, it's going to be cheaper. And then you can start having conversations and start making the plans and setting the budgets and getting all the approvals you have to go through to make it happen. So I always just tell people, start having those conversations now. Don't wait for a grant to be announced, because by that time it's too late. So you start having the conversations now, get the projects together, because as we see, the funding is going to keep happening for at least the next 5 years.
Thanks, Gary. I know focus a lot on government, but is there a through line into this business world and that you want to add to?
Well, I mean, I think maybe I would just add, keeping with the theme here, that there really has been a change in the script that I think corporate America, the corporate world is working from today. I think 10 years ago, local governments would view businesses in their community as a potential adversary in trying to make climate or sustainability progress. And now we often see it's the business community that is pushing the local government to try to provide more information or to be more proactive. So that is just kind of one of the points I tried to make earlier, an untapped resource. There's a sentiment amongst local governments, for example, in economic development, that we cannot unilaterally disarm, meaning we cannot start to repurpose our economic development tools and strategies to try to encourage more sustainability or climate action. And that is, that's a misnomer. Actually, you're going to find, I think, a lot more willingness if you do this in a negotiated way with businesses, with developers, to try and repurpose some of those tools, because those are some of the more powerful levers that local governments have to try to incentivize a cleaner, greener environment.
That's great. Do we have questions? Anybody? Yeah.
One for Kelly Karn. Duke Energy is positioned to benefit from experience in other states. And it seems we see more examples of progressive programs outside Indiana. One of the themes I'm hearing today is urgency, which means do more quicker. And my question is, do you have a sense from leadership at Duke that they are amenable, in particular Duke Energy Indiana, to leverage some of that experience in other states to offer more progressive programs in this state? In particular, possibly, if I could envision the company, the utility company, encouraging the legislature to have policies that are more supportive of customer-owned distributed generation, at least to have an attitude that's somewhat positive or neutral as opposed to being negative. We need all the help we can get from everywhere we can find it, and private investment could be part of the solution.
So at Duke Energy, you're right, we have 7 different states that we're operating in 7 different political and policy type jurisdictions, and so we're kind of leading to where we are, and we do take programs from other states and import them into Indiana and out of Indiana into our other states too. So we take those learnings on a regular basis, and so I do see a future for distributed generation in Indiana, renewable generation in Indiana. I think it will continue to grow. I think as especially solar, there's developments in solar panels, and the smaller scales can become more economic. But I do think in the near term, the magnitude of turnover that we need to do in our generation fleet for Duke Energy Indiana, I think as a utility, we're going to be pretty focused on larger solar projects and larger wind projects to help us get there faster. One, the economies of scale of a 200 megawatt project versus 201 megawatt projects, I guess, helps kind of lead us that way to start. But I think we're open to thinking about and looking at different policy solutions and working with our customers. We know our customers want clean energy solutions. On the residential side, we offer green power options where customers can we can buy renewable energy credits to help customers offset some of their own emissions. And we're also looking at things internally about like community type solar programs, subscription type programs for solar in local communities as well. So I think you'll see more as we go forward. I appreciate the urgency, and I'll say that we're working on it.
I think we've got a final question out here.
This is also for Kelly Karn. Back in 2016, 2017, the city was very involved in a group solar project trying to get a lot of residential households on board. We did a lot of research. Solar panels had gotten down to the price where we could calculate a reasonable return on investment. Our business at Worldwide Automotive installed 155 solar panels, calculated our return on investment at about 8.5 years. Now, all of a sudden, the Duke has put the kibosh on net metering. So going forward, businesses, households, instead of having true net metering, their excess generation is being purchased at wholesale rates. So what that has done is that has increased the return on investment to 50 to 60% increase in terms of the amount of years it takes to pay the investment off, despite the decreasing cost of solar panels. So my question is Duke considering changing their opinion about net metering, and if not, why?
Yeah, so thanks for that question. And as I explained earlier, so the policy in Indiana is what changed from a legislative perspective, not necessarily Duke Energy. So the excess distributed generation pricing is now a statewide policy that Duke Energy has to follow under the law today. I would say, we're open to looking at different options there. Under the new law, if a customer is really just serving themselves with that energy, they are getting the full retail credit. It's just the excess generation on top of that that is priced at the wholesale price plus a premium. And those, were really policy decisions that were ultimately made by the legislature. In some other states, we've had some traction on working with some renewable and community groups to come up with sort of an in-between option where we can maybe provide some incentives on top of that structure that might make the pay down for a solar plant more productive. And we've been having some of those discussions in Indiana. We haven't really quite gotten there yet. The one thing that we always have to balance at Duke Energy, and what the regulators will make us balance in terms of getting approval for programs and projects like this, is the overall cost to the entire customer base, the reliability of the system, and how fast we're moving to clean energy. So we're sort of doing our best to balance all of those things in mind, keeping them all in mind.
Okay, well, Kelly, Kelly, Ben, Carrie, Aaron, thanks very much for your participation, for your presentations today. We really appreciate it. And we will be taking an 8-minute break. Go get some cookies and some coffee and water. Grab one of the CBU water bottles, which are there for your, as a gift for coming. And we will get back together at 3 o'clock. Thank you. Welcome back for our final panel. Our final panel will discuss ways to collaborate for collective impact to achieve climate goals. Panelists will discuss the several forms of multi-sectoral and regional collaboration. So I'd like to welcome the panelists. Lisa Abbott, at the end, currently serves as the Vice President of Economic and Community Development for Regional Opportunity Initiatives. In her capacity at ROI, she oversees the programs aimed at improving and enhancing the quality of life for residents of the Indiana uplands. Before her tenure at ROI, she served as Executive Vice President of the Bloomington Board of Realtors, serving Monroe, Owen, and Greene County. Prior to that, she worked in local government for more than 2 decades, working in community development, affordable housing, code enforcement, historic preservation, and neighborhood development. She holds a bachelor's degree and a master's of Public Affairs from Indiana University. Daniel Pointer works as an engineer for worked as an engineer for a decade before taking a sabbatical to interview 300 people working on the environment in the Midwest in 2019. From this year of research, he created the nonprofit Carbon Neutral Indiana. They have 3 programs. First, they've helped over 600 Hoosier households measure their carbon footprints. Second, they sponsor climate solutions reporters at Purdue. And finally, they published a book called Carbon Neutral Indiana, which I happen to have right here. A practical guide for climate optimism. Daniel was named a MacArthur Fellow Young Innovator, and he's advised over 100 entrepreneurs. Matt Flaherty serves as the implementation manager of the Environmental Resilience Institute. In this role, Matt connects Midwestern local governments with climate change mitigation and adaptation solutions. His core projects include managing ERIT, the Resilience Cohort, ERI's webinar series, the Hoosier Resilience Index, and the Beat the Heat program. Matt also serves on the Bloomington Common Council and is the chair of the Council Climate Action and Resilience Committee. And Matt is stepping in for someone who had to not be able to make it, so your packet doesn't have Matt's bio, but we have it here. Thank you for standing in, Matt. And Mark Stewart is the president of the United Way of Bartholomew County and has over 300 years of experience. I'm sorry, that's a lot of years, Mark. 30 years of experience in the field of community development and human services. Previously, the president of Southeast Neighborhood Development, Mark oversaw the rapid transformation of the Fountain Square neighborhood in Indianapolis. Over his career, Mark has served on a number of blue ribbon panels, including abandoned housing, crime, court reform, sustainable neighborhood design, and infrastructure improvements in core neighborhoods. Mark holds a master's degree in public administration from Indiana University School of Public and Environmental Affairs. So welcome, everyone. So I'm going to start, Lisa, with you. Can you tell us about the different forms of public-private partnerships you've seen in your work and the factors that lead to success in those partnerships?
Sure. So I wanted to start with a couple of notes that I took from listening to the other speakers today. We talked about having a stakeholder view and jobs for communities, so people-centric ideas. And then realistic and practical ideas that we build in resilience into the system, so we know process. How are we realistic, practical, and how are we building resilience? And then in the last panel, somebody said something about it being lonely out there. And so partnerships is a really good way to not be lonely out there while you're working on these other things. So a couple of examples that I've worked on, and I also have to have notes and glasses, and I would really like a petite chair, but okay, we'll let that go. So one of the ones I wanted to talk about was the state of Indiana's broadband deployment project. Okay? So if you've been paying attention to that, and that really became evident that was necessary during COVID, you know, we talk about how we needed to have broadband with everyone, and that was really a true partnership, because what you've seen over the last couple of years is communities really dig into this issue. Schools, libraries, the state of Indiana, providers, I mean, everybody's playing a role in order to get Indiana connected through broadband because we know that we need it for economic development, education, workforce training, and just plain quality of life. So that's a partnership that's really working. And through that partnership, Indiana has invested $155 million into broadband expansion in the state of Indiana. And I will say $44 million of that was invested in the Indiana uplands, and we're real excited about that. So it's been really a successful project. It's not over yet. We're still working on it, and there's a lot to do. But I think it's really moving forward with everybody at the table. Another project that I wanted to chat about a little bit was housing. So we know in the state of Indiana that we have a housing issue. We need single-family housing, we need rental housing, we need senior housing, we need everybody to play a part in doing housing. And what we've seen recently in a project that we're working on in the Indiana uplands is that we have non-traditional developers stepping up to the table to help. So for example, Cooke Incorporated, which is an Indiana uplands company, is actually working with local communities, utility companies, and ROI in order to provide housing to mostly employees of Cooke Incorporated. But over the next couple of years, that project is going to house 200 Indiana families. And this is being done by a company that this is not their main course of business. So non-traditional partners can actually step up and do things that can really benefit projects such as climate control, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be somebody who that's their main mission. And then the last one that I wanted to chat about was Ready Schools. So this is a ROI initiative where we use design thinking process. So really we're looking at project, people-centric ideas to solve hard problems. And we bring together partners from all over their community to talk about how we can move the school forward so that it can be aligned and the workforce, the K through 12 workforce, that's our workforce that's coming up, will be able to take the jobs of the future. And so this project starts with building what we call an EWAT, which is an Educational and Workforce Advisory Team. And that includes stakeholders such as teachers, school administrators, industry experts, students, families, school volunteers, as well as community leaders such as community foundations, child services, and post-secondary education partners. And one of the really great things about this project is that once this is over, they don't disappear. The workforce advisory team and the industry partners really stay engaged in implementation of the process. And the industry partners provide things such as information on career pathways, they provide STEM activities for classrooms, advise on student-run businesses, provide guest speakers, hold job fairs, and also offer internships. So again, this allows the schools to understand how important they are to economic prosperity, but it also has the community and the businesses understand how important the schools are to their well-being as well. And so I think that these are ways that we can bring people together in non-traditional ways to tackle hard issues.
Thanks, Lisa. So if you can't tell, we're starting kind of local, then we're going a little bit wider, then we're going a little bit wider. So Daniel, from your experience, how are organizations in the Midwest collaborating on climate change? How have partnerships been integral to the success of Hoosier entrepreneurs reducing carbon emissions?
Well, thanks for putting this together. Actually, I want to pass this book around. You can't keep it. It's my only copy. But in 2 weeks, we'll get thousands more. And everybody in this room can have a free copy. Just email me. I haven't been in a book discussion in years, so I'm not going to make anyone feel bad, but can you raise your hand if you've ever been in a book discussion in your entire life? Can you keep your hand up if you've been in a book discussion in the last 5 years? And keep it up if you've been in a book discussion in the last year. Okay, so we raised $30,000 to print 3,000 copies of this book. And the book basically profiles 60 people throughout Indiana who are reducing carbon in really interesting ways, in creative ways. It includes the story of Lauren Travis at the Office of Sustainability here in Bloomington, partnering with businesses to reduce or to improve building efficiency. One of the stories that I think everybody should look into is Michigan City did an emissions baseline with ERI, which ERI is a jewel of the state. But that inspired someone named Kathy Sipple, and she created something called Northwest Indiana Region Resilience. And they got Lake County, Porter County, and LaPorte County, and dozens of cities all to collaborate to create a climate action plan. So check that out. Check out Kathy Sipple and how she made that happen. One of the people I interviewed, he runs the water system at Fort Wayne, and they built a methane digester, and they burn all the methane, and they create electricity. And talk about partnerships. Down the road in Anderson, Indiana, there's the Nestle factory. Has anybody ever seen that? They truck 3 truckloads of biological waste every day to Fort Wayne and dump it in the methane digester and create electricity. And then they're partnering with Huntington, Indiana to collect grease from all the restaurants in Huntington, and they're going to dump it in the methane digester. He told me this is one of the best ways that communities can collaborate is around methane digesters because they're capital intensive, and it's really good for different regions. Doesn't Bloomington have such a thing, a methane digester? Working on it, okay. So that's a really clear-cut way. But I also wanted to mention that in order to collaborate, I think it's really important to have a mindset shift. There is a well-known organization, they reached out to me not to talk or to learn, but to threaten me with a lawsuit. So there is some stuff going on behind the scenes. It's not always friendly, and people don't talk about that. I debated whether I should even say that tonight. I would encourage 3 lessons for mindset shift so we can have more partnership. The first one is not to be ivory tower. I think businesses, especially small businesses, are underrepresented in the climate movement. Climate tends to be very high, upper middle class. It's very big in like trust fund areas like Boulder, Colorado. It needs to be more of the people, more blue collar. To help with that, I would encourage everyone to read Thomas Sowell, Conflict of Visions, and his book, The Vision of the Anointed. He's saying that we consider ourselves the anointed, and we have to go save the poor blue class. That is a terribly awful way to think about it. So I really encourage people to read Thomas Sowell. The second thing is pursue the truth. Don't be afraid. I went to Purdue a few years ago to see Katharine Hayhoe. Has anyone heard of Katharine Hayhoe? She had 500 people in the audience talking about how to reach evangelicals about climate. 500 people came to see Katharine Hayhoe. A few years later, Mitch Daniels hosted Stephen Koonin, who has a PhD in theoretical physics from MIT. But he wrote a book called Unsettled, Why Climate Science is Not as Settled as You Might Think. 500 people showed up to that one too. So I saw Katharine Hayhoe retweet Michael Mann saying he doesn't debate this guy ever again. He's never going to debate this guy. And I chimed in. I just said, hey, there was 500 people at Purdue. You should engage them. If it's easy to slam dunk this man, do it. Get some points. And then Michael Mann blocked me on Twitter. And Katharine Hayhoe threatened to block me. That sends up red flags. Why are you censorious? You know, pursue the truth. The truth has nothing to fear. That should not be allowed. And in Europe, they polled young people, and the young people said that they think authoritarian governments will be more effective at dealing with climate. That means that authoritarians could take over. Democracies and free speech and free minds, they need to deal with climate properly. We cannot be censorious. And then the final thing about mindset shift is just have conversations with people. I think this book, about 150 people told me that they want to participate in small book discussions. So we have like 30 people from healthcare, including the guy who buys everything for IU Health, a CEO of a hospital. We have like 20 people from the legal profession. So if you want to participate in a small virtual book discussion, get in touch with me. I'll send you a free book and make some new friends. I think that's the main thing, is partnership begins with friends.
Thanks, Daniel. Matt? What are the forms of climate collaboration that are being used by other communities across the United States?
Thank you, Alex. And yeah, apologies that my colleague Danny Schaus couldn't be here today, came down ill unexpectedly. And this is really her area a little bit, looking at this public-private sector collaboration. I wanted to mention, something we learned actually from a exercise we did earlier this spring with Kelly Eskew, who spoke earlier, Sarah Mincy, our managing director, and some others, which was funded by the EPA, trying to bring in folks from multiple sectors around Indiana, private sector, and local governments to talk about collaboration, what that would look like, what they need, what information they need, how they could make this work. And just a few key takeaways I wanted to highlight that I think are relevant to the national landscape of collaborations as well. One was they need leadership support, so within their government, within businesses, within the community. Two was that they need regular convening or communication, a network or a group, and ideally something that's resourced, has a facilitator or convener or staff. Staff can be a tall order, but at least a convener to start. Third was some education and climate literacy component. We're all approaching these issues that touch every aspect of our lives and futures from different places and have different knowledge sets, different experiences. So the need to educate community, employees, leadership itself is part of the challenge. And then fourth was, and we heard this mentioned earlier as well, a desire to engage the state legislature in some way, that it acknowledged that even a sort of local, regional, collaborative probably needs to have at least some interaction with some larger entities like the state. A few examples from around the country and around the Midwest. First, there's some planning entities. So we're actually involved in some of this. Daniel mentioned the regional collaborative up in Northwest Indiana, headed by Earth Charter Indiana, Kathy Sipple, but also the Northwestern Indiana Regional Planning Commission. They're engaged in, yes, 24 jurisdiction regional planning, climate planning effort. We've seen that a little bit starting to take off. The Metro Washington, D.C. area, the Greater Kansas City area, also the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus in Chicago, representing about 40 municipalities up there. They're collaborating on their EV infrastructure deployment, so that they're doing this in an intelligent way, coordinated, because they don't want to essentially mess it up or make sure that the resources go only to the communities that are the ones with capacity and infrastructure to jump at the opportunity. So they're working together, especially where it makes sense on regional issues. And many climate issues are regional issues. Watershed management kind of came up earlier today, right? That's not a Monroe County issue or a Bloomington issue. That's touching other counties around us. We definitely experience a lot of the same types of impacts, so it makes sense to work together and learn from one another for that purpose. A couple others I'll mention. There's a Greater Cincinnati Regional Climate Collaborative that's kicked off just recently, convened by a nonprofit organization called Green Umbrella, working in a 10-county region across states, bringing in private sector, local government folks to work together on preparing for climate change impacts. Another is the Midwest Climate Collaborative. They are a membership-based organization, also pretty new, again, cross-sectoral, working on a coherent approach to tackling climate issues in the Midwest. One that I think is especially promising and relevant for this conversation is the Boston Green Ribbon Commission, which is built not regionally so much as within a city and built around the city's climate action plan. But I think it's important in that it's governmental leadership, it's leadership from the private sector, from community-based organizations, all working together on a few key tasks. One is to advise the implementation of the plan itself, to lead by example and to help scale solutions for implementing that plan, and then also to help advocate for those changes, those solutions, the changes that need to be made at the state level, at the city level, whatever it is, and to amplify that need in their networks, in their communities. So there's no one way that, and there's lots of informal arrangements, of course, as well, where folks are collaborating. So there's no one way to do it. I think it's important to think about what the structure and purpose is going to be, what the scope is going to be for an effort like that, and develop a shared vision and a plan to how you're going to work together.
Thanks, Matt. The collaboration is kind of a thread through all of the different models, I guess. Mark, in your 300 years of experience, can you tell us about the meaning of collective impacts and the important structural elements that make collective impact partnerships successful?
Sure. So if we think about climate change and all sorts of other social issues, they are incredibly complex. If you think about just the entities and the people that are represented in this room right here, 30 different organizations, all wanting to do good work, all focused on climate change. And there's a lot of talk about what are we going to do, what are we going to do, what are we going to do. Collective impact is a framework for how are we going to all work together. And I would argue that how we are all going to work together is as important as what are we actually going to do. So if you look at the slide over there, on your left is isolated impact. All of those arrows going in different directions. They represent good organizations, good people doing good work, but in an uncoordinated fashion. On the right side, using the elements of collective impact, it's about getting alignment so that we're all trying to accomplish the same thing. There's a lot, often, collaboration is a word that gets thrown around a lot in these circles, but oftentimes collaboration is defined or identified as people kind of loosely working together. Collective impact puts a very specific framework around how that can actually happen. The elements are, number one, a common vision. There are probably 30 different visions in this room right now of what we ought to do. Is it possible for us to get on one common page and have one set of common goals? And then can we measure the same things? So government typically wants to measure one set of things. Business wants to measure another set of things. The not-for-profit sector wants to measure another set of things. Unless we are all measuring the same things, working towards the same goal, the threat is that we may end up on the left side of the slide over there. Constant communication. We as society are often very siloed, right? And unless we have constant communication where all different partners are talking very thoughtfully with each other towards the common goals, with the shared measures, that will present a challenge. And do the actions that we are all taking reinforce each other, right? If some folks are working upstream and some are working downstream and some are working midstream, we have to be very cognizant that what some of us do in the room might actually be working against what someone else in this room is doing. All the time being cognizant that it's really about that constant communication, that alignment. And the key kind of linchpin that holds the whole thing together is defined as a backbone organization. This stuff takes work. It is incredibly difficult. It takes staffed organizations daily working on the alignment, especially for such a large topic as climate change. And underpinning all of this is really relationships. So I really like to thank the organizers of this conference here. To start out on the relationships, how do we all work together? How do we build those relationships? Because one topic will come and another topic will go, and next year it'll be a different topic with climate change. 3 years, it'll be another topic from climate change. We're not all going to agree on everything. But if we have strong relationships, these topics, these discussions, they come and go, but the relationships are what last. And just want to say that collective impact was a phrase coined by two guys, Kanya and Kramer, probably 15 years ago from FSG Consulting. But there's a lot of work out there on it. So. And you had a resource, I think you listed it, is that right? An article? Yeah, it's in the Stanford Innovation Review. You can Google it and it'll pop up right away.
Okay, I will look out to see if there are any questions. Put up your hands if you have one. If we're all in the middle of food coma, I will ask a question. And I'm going to put everybody on the spot a little bit. What do you think the first steps are that would be necessary to start a collaboration on climate in the 3 counties? First step. You don't have to set up the whole thing. Or maybe just throw out some thoughts about, what might be considered in that first set. I mean, I would say, what is the purpose that we are trying to accomplish in a pretty specific way? I mean, climate change, I've heard a lot of, I have a basic understanding of it, but I know very little about climate change. But unless we have a very clear purpose of what exactly we're trying to accomplish, I think the rest of it becomes a challenge.
This was a good first step. But yeah, it'll take some follow-up from this, of course. So I think there was a survey link I saw in the program. That's probably useful for folks to fill out. I didn't get asked to say that either. But we can at least get some idea of probably how folks are orienting to this, what they would like to see. I know that there was probably some intention behind who was asked to be here, and there's probably others that we could reach out to. But yeah, I'll agree that I think next steps include identifying the scope and purpose. I mean, there's kind of climate planning is being done everywhere, and we have lots of examples to look, including in Indiana. We've got lots of great examples to look to, so we can talk about whether it's resilience and including economic resilience that we really want to focus on, whether we want to talk about more of emissions reductions and clean energy and job opportunities there. These things overlap, but yeah, defining that scope, shared purpose, shared vision, and then working on some planning to get going on that.
That we think about who's at the table and who isn't at the table, and how do we get those non-traditional partners that will have impact to join us and sit at the table to work on this topic. And I think that Mark is right. I think that we need to build those relationships so that we can get them to really play an active role.
I'm going to ask another question. This may be more general and for all of you. What factors do you think lend themselves to more successful formal or informal partnerships? So what factors, what are the ingredients of successful in the either formal or informal partnership realm?
Okay, I'll go. And
No,
then,
go ahead.
and then you can be after me, right? So I think that in a topic that's this complicated, it's going to have some of both. I think that you probably will have to have some formalized partnerships. I think that Mark is right when he talks about having a backbone organization, and that organization is going to have formalized partnerships with a lot of different entities to get this topic moving. But I think in conjunction with that, you're going to have those informal relationships and partners that will do things on the ground. And so I think it's going to be, in this particular instance, both.
I would just piggyback on that. To me, it's really about inclusion. And so, if we think about a metaphorical room, not necessarily all in one room, but a metaphorical room, you have the right people in the room. If all the people in that metaphorical room decided that they were going to do something, if they were going to do something and they all agreed to it, would they be able to get it done? And if the answer to that question is no, you need to rearrange the people in the room or get more people in the room.
Good way to think. Daniel?
I heard a story. I love Buckminster Fuller. Has anybody heard of that name? I know Joel Grant has, my friend. So Buckminster Fuller, when I first met my wife, within a week, I go, do you want to come with me to Brooklyn, New York? The Buckminster Fuller Institute has a 10th anniversary. She's like, who are you? So we flew to New York, and I actually got to meet Allegra Fuller, his 95-year-old daughter, Buckminster Fuller's daughter. He invented the Epcot Dome and a lot of other stuff. And every year they give an award to some social innovator, some tinkerer, just like Joel Grant, my friend. Garden towers are made here in Bloomington. It combines composting with growing your own vegetables. It's amazing. Check out Garden Tower. But this award goes to people like Joel Grant, who are creating technologies that can actually possibly have systemic changes. And the year that I went, the 10th anniversary, I met this man from India, and I pulled him aside and I said, because I spent a lot of time studying religion. I converted to Orthodox Judaism. I studied philosophy. I think a lot about religion, and I think a lot about nihilism and relativism, and how can we balance between fundamentalist and relativism. So I asked him, when you were raised in India, how did your parents educate you? Did they educate you with the ancient myths of India, kind of like an evangelical charter school or something? Or did they send you to a Montessori school where it's like anybody can do whatever they want, it's scientific? He goes, well, I had a scientific upbringing. And this is to answer your question. I said, well, why didn't your mom send you to a more traditional Indian school? And he said, well, in our religion, we bring sacrifices to the temple and so on. And he's like, well, my mom interpreted that. She said, God lives in every single person. And instead of bringing sacrifices to the temple, bring sacrifices to the person you're talking to, because God lives within them. And what sacrifices do you bring? But love and respect and listening. So I think this idea of somehow, I know it's not cool to love and it's cynical. We can be kind of cynical. But how do we dust off that? We haven't had a spiritual revival in this country since the 90s. We need some kind of spiritual lovingness. And I don't know, I think that's the core to a respectful partnership. That kind of, that type, treating someone like that.
I'll wrap up with one short comment, which I think is related to all of those and dovetails on opening remarks from Lisa, which is that this has to be people-centric. That's an important focus here. We heard during our keynote discussion of grandkids as a motivator, for instance, and I think what Daniel was sharing is in that vein too, that this is really about people at the end of the day. It's about public health, it's about good jobs, it's about clean air and water, which are all related to climate issues. So making sure that that's front and center in motivations and how it's messaged and communicated.
That's a good point. Okay. Any questions from the Magic platform? No. Okay. So I think we will, first of all, please join me in thanking the panel for today. Oh, I'm sorry, there was one question.
Do we have time for one more?
Yeah, we can do it.
Okay.
This idea of partnerships reminds me of a circumstance last week. We have a group of 3 nonprofits and a company, actually 2 companies now, that are helping low-income people get solar power because they spend too much of their income for energy, but they don't make enough income to qualify for federal income tax credits. So we kind of mediate between that. But then last week something came up with 2 of the nonprofits that they'd not anticipated, and it affected some of the clients. Basically, it was just eventuality that was not anticipated. It wasn't written down. It wasn't in the planning structure. It just happened. And the 2 nonprofits are discussing, how do we handle this? And somebody said, well, let's ask the other group. And guess what? The other group had already been there. So if we're trying to get forward faster, it helps if you keep moving forward. If you stop and go sideways or go backwards because you overlook something that maybe was predictable if you would have had 2020 foresight, it really helps to have partners because different groups, different people have different information at different times. You can get there quicker if you have an informing partner.
Thanks. Thank you for that. I'm messing around with you back there. All right, well, listen, we will maybe just keep moving here. Skip the table discussion. We're going to go to kind of the wrap up. But before we do, I just, again, wanted to thank Lisa, Matt, and Mark, and Daniel for your participation. Thank you very much.
That was so cool.
So as we close, I'd like to recognize the significant effort of a number of people who helped organize this event. While there are too many to name all of them individually, I did want to call out several people for their Herculean efforts. Lacey Lingelbach, where are you, Lacey? Back there, is a second-year O'Neill Master student. She cracked the whip and kept us all on task. Lacey most certainly has a remarkable career in front of her, so thank you, Lacey. Also, yeah. Michelle Sills, where's Michelle? Standing over there. Runs a local independent event management operation called Paragon Event Management. Michelle masterfully and gracefully organized logistics for today's events. I strongly recommend Michelle Sills for your event management needs, and no, she didn't tell me to say that, so thank you, Michelle. Thank you also to the Community Foundation of Bloomington and Monroe County and the Heritage Fund, which is the Community Foundation of Bartholomew County, for their generous financial support of this event. And finally, I'd like to acknowledge the significant contributions of Lauren Clemens, formerly Travis, in the book, Assistant Director for Sustainability of the City of Bloomington, Andrew Krebs, Director of Communications, the rest of the communication team, including Justin, the Cummins team, and the various staff members from Columbus and Bloomington and respective mayor's offices and across all 3 counties for their help. Now I'll hand it off to Mayor Hamilton and Mayor Lienhoop to close out for the day. After the mayor's remarks, and before you leave, take our survey to provide feedback about today's event. The link is on the agenda, and you can scan that with a QR code. We also have some paper surveys available for those of you that need that. And please be sure to take a City of Bloomington water bottle, if you haven't grabbed one already, a small token of our appreciation for your participation today. Thanks to the Utilities Group for their contribution. And now, Mayors Hamilton and Lienhoop, take us home.
Thanks, Alex. You know, at a time like this, I'm often hit with the realization or the notion, you know, when you get back to the office, what's the first thing you're going to do? And I'll share with you that I read my biography, and I'm going to update that. It says that Pam and I were married have been married for over 30 years, and she thinks we've been married for over 40. So we'll fix that when I get back home. But you know, on a more serious note, we're struck by the notion that this is what you might call a quadrant 2 kind of decision, or a quadrant 2 type issue. It's not urgent in the standpoint that I talked earlier about homeless, you know, who are trying to figure out where they're going to sleep tonight. But this is important. You know, this is something that we do need to address and devote some resources to. But I'm reminded a little bit of what I think Tom Leinberger tried to tell us, which is while this is important, there are some real impediments to moving forward. And it was hit on one of the slides that we saw in terms of the restrictions or the impediments that local government has. You know, in general, all throughout, and not just in Indiana, but I go to mayor's conferences all across the country, municipal government is lean. It's really not got a lot of extra. People will tell you that there's fat and waste and so forth, but I've been there, done that. It really isn't. And so for us to be able to say that we're going to devote you know, some extra person power, some extra money to this, it's going to be difficult to find. And so that's where the notion of partnerships comes in, because I do believe in terms of what was the phrase, non-traditional, you know, types of providers. I think we can look to Cummins, or I think we can look to Cooke, or we can look to other folks who have some of the expertise that we're looking for. And I think what you begin to hear is some of the motivation, you know, within the board suites there to help us address these issues. So, you know, with that in mind, I mean, that's kind of what we will, John and I will be focusing on over the next month or so, trying to find a way to take what we've heard here today, what we hope to hear from you in the survey, and go from there. So thanks again for your attention here today. We appreciate it very much, and we'll be in touch. Take care.
Thank you. We're going to get you out of here early today. The cookies are gone, I think. So, and Alex, thank you, and all that you thanked. Alex is not available, MC. Don't try to get him away from his day job. But we appreciate the wonderful leading of this. So let me just close out with a couple comments. We've thanked the sponsors, including O'Neill Spia. We want to thank them for helping make this happen, as well as the two community foundations in the two cities. So this is the first climate convening that I know of here. I very much hope that we can look back at some point, or some of you can look back at some point and say, you remember that October 4th, 2022 meeting? That actually made some things happen. This is a very hard and complicated issue that we're talking about. I know you know that we have no planet B, as has been said sometimes. We also don't have community B. We have our communities, and it's up to us to figure out how to make it work, both for this planet and for our communities. They are ours, and we have to figure out how to move forward. One thing, Mayor Lienhoop, good friend, thank you so much for working together. I do think one thing about mayors is we just have to be practical in our jobs. There's not time not to be. We can have hopes and visions and work, but we have to be practical about how are we going to move forward. As they famously said, there's no Republican or Democrat way to pick up garbage. You just have to pick it up, because if you don't, then things won't happen. And I think for me, and I hope for us, this is an enormously challenging problem. We are all wrestling with it. I believe that if we are practical about trying to take some steps focused on the people that can move us forward. So next year, we're better than we were this year. And the year after that, we're better than we were the year before that. And that we keep that progress going. I liked Tim Leinberger and my good old friend Carol Casto, who helped come here, talking about get our oars in the water. Just get your oar in the water. Most of you have oars in the water already, but if we can steer them in the same direction, I believe we have a chance to move faster, to address a very, very complicated and sometimes overwhelming problem. So we don't have the solution. I do think a collaborative effort, and I thank Matt for describing 4 characteristics of successful collaboration. Leadership, that means everybody involved in it, bringing some leadership. Regular convenings that are resourced. This stuff does not happen without resources to help make it happen. We all are really busy people, and we all have day jobs, and we all do the best, but if we want to be collaborative and create those relationships, I do believe we need to have a convening and a resourced effort. Education also, helping all of us get smarter. I'm going to confess, I didn't know scope 1, 2, 3. If you quiz me on how to define those, I could not still do it. I think I'm getting a sense of that, but I don't know all that stuff, and we all have education opportunities and then reaching bigger. So the purpose to me is not that complicated. Now again, being practical, the purpose is we have a climate emergency. We have to respond to it, I hope, and the purpose is let's get better at responding to it as a group than we do alone. That's the purpose to me, and we find ways to do that together. So I know how busy you all are. I know I so appreciate you taking time to be here today out of that, and I do hope that Jim and I will take as a next step that we're going to talk about what is the next step. Fill out your survey. Tell us what you think it is. Tell us whether you want to be part of that, or you can name somebody else if you don't want to be. You can, delegate it to somebody else. But tell us who you want to be part of that, and we will be back in touch. And again, you were in the right place on October 4th, 2022. Thank you for being here. Thank everybody. We're out early. There's more food. Fill out your survey. Take care. Thanks.